Welcome to 7.2, Rates and Unit Rates. A rate is a special kind of ratio where two amounts being compared have different units. Now you remember that when we were studying ratios, a ratio is two amounts being compared that have the same unit, but in a rate we have two different units. For example, if Chris drove 107 miles in 2 hours, the units are miles and hours. So our rate would be 107 miles to 2 hours. Another way to say this is 107 miles per 2 hours. A unit rate is a rate that has 1 as its denominator. So your numerator will have a number and your denominator will be set as 1 with a unit rate. There are two methods to find a unit rate. The first method, we can set up a ratio as a fraction and then divide the numerator by the, what do you think, denominator. This method is called, this is something we've used before, ice cream. So we're basically, oops, I misspelled that, didn't I? We are dividing the top number by the bottom number. The other way we can do this is set up a ratio equal to a ratio with the numerator blank and the denominator set to 1, and then use the hamburger method to find the missing numerator. So we've worked with this a little bit in ratios, and I'm going to give you some more examples now. Alright, so our first example. A car can travel 300 miles on 15 gallons of gasoline. What is the unit rate per gallon of gas? Now, per means divide. If we're using the ice cream method, then per means divide. And then I want you to notice something about gallon of gas. Now, at first it says that the car can travel 300 miles on 15 gallons of gas, and now we want to know what the unit rate is per gallon of gas. So when we have 15 gallons of gas, gallons was plural, but now we want to know what it is at per gallon of gas, and gallon of gas is singular. Let's see if I can get that on there. Alright, so let's take a look at method 1. It says 300 miles to 15 gallons. To write that as a rate, we would say 300 miles to how many gallons? 15. Alright, and in method 1 it says to take our numerator and divide it by the denominator. So 300 divided by 15, let's see, 15 goes into 32 times, you have 0 left over, 15 goes into 0 times, so that is 20 miles per gallon. That is 20 miles per 1 gallon. Alright, let's see what it looks like with the hamburger method. So, we know that we have 300 miles per 15 gallons. And we know that a unit rate is something per 1 gallon. So how do you go from 15 to 1? Well, 15 divided by 15 is 1. So that means that whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. 300 divided by 15 will give us 20, just like it did in method 1. So the unit rate is 20 miles per gallon. This means the car can travel 20 miles on 1 gallon of gasoline. Alright, so I'm not just going to give you one example and then move on. Let's take a look at something else. So when we have a unit rate and it is talking about a price, that is called the unit cost, or it could be called the unit price. These terms are interchangeable. Sometimes you might see it as unit cost, sometimes you might see it as unit price. These are the same thing. It is a unit rate. When you're calculating the unit cost or the unit price, be sure to put the price in the numerator or the top of the fraction. Let's see what that looks like. For example, Gerald paid, let's go back up, I'm so sorry. Gerald pays $90 for 6 yoga classes. What is the cost per class? So again, per means divide, and if you look here, we have a division sign for our fraction. If you'll recall, our fraction line also means divide. So if we have cost per class and order matters, that means that we have cost per class. Cost is on top, class is on bottom, per is in the middle. Alright, so what is his current cost per class? So we know that he pays $90 per 6 classes. So what will he pay per 1 class? So we know that it's going to be per 1 class, so we can set up our unit rate on this side to 1 class. And how do we do that? So how do we go from, how do we go from 6 to 1? How do you go from 6 to 1 using either multiplication or division? Well, we can't multiply 6 times anything to get to 1, so let's try dividing. And if you recall, 6 divided by 6 gives you 1. Alright, so what happens if we take 90 and divide it by 6? Well, 90 divided by 6, 6 goes into 9. 1 moment. 6 goes into 9 one time. 9 minus 6 is 3. Bring down your 0. So 6 goes into 30 5 times. So it will cost you $15 per 1 class. That is our unit rate. So Gerald's yoga classes cost $15 per class, which is about average. Alright, Gerald. So let's see another example. This is going to be a multi-step example. This one is going to be a little bit more difficult and will need a little more thought. So at a summer camp, the campers are divided into groups. Each group has 16 campers and 2 cabins. How many cabins are needed for 112 campers? So first I would find the unit rate to find out how many campers are in one cabin, then find an equivalent rate. Alright, so let's set this up. We know that we have 16 campers and 2 cabins. So in our first unit rate, or in our first rate, we're going to have 16 campers for every 2 cabins. Alright, and we know that if we want to get it to a unit rate, that our denominator is going to have to be 1. So how do we go from 2, how do we go from 2 to 1? How do we go from 2 to 1? Well, we can't multiply anything to get there, so I guess we're going to have to divide. And I know that 2 divided by 2 equals 1. So whatever we did to the bottom, we need to do this to the top. So 16 divided by 2. Alright. 16 divided by 2 is, you got it, 8. Alright, so now what do? Now we need to go to the next step. We need to set up another rate for our 112 campers. And remember, whatever's on top stays on bottom. So campers stay the same all the way across, cabins stay the same all the way across. We know that our end result will have 112 campers, so I've gone ahead and filled that in for you here, 112 campers. Alright, so how do we go from 8 campers to 112? Well, we're going to have to multiply to go from 8 campers to 112. But I don't know what that is off the top of my head. So what is the operation that undoes multiplication so that we can find this unknown number right here? It's the inverse operation. And the inverse operation of multiplication is division. Alright, so that means I need to take 112 and divide it by 8. And when you divide 112 by 8, you end up with 14. So that means if 112 divided by 8 is 14, then 8 times 14 is 112. And if you know what to do on the top, then you know what to do on the bottom. And what is 1 times 14? Well, you should be able to guess this. 1 times 14 is 14. So how many cabins does the camp need to house 112 campers? They need 14 cabins. Sorry, let me move that up for you. They need 14 cabins. Alright, if you have any questions on how we found this, please watch it as many times as needed, and don't forget to complete your assignment.